Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes, but as you are joining in, it'll be nice if you can start putting in just your organization name and your own name as well. We will start in a couple of minutes. Hi, Amit. Hi, Professor Mishra. Hi, Raj. Hi, Kathy. All right, let's get started then. So again, a very warm welcome to everybody, depending on where you are situated in the world, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. This is the second webinar in our knowledge series, and today's title is Sustainability, Making It Tangible. After the launch of our successful knowledge series about a month back when we had discussed GCCs in India, this is the second episode of the series, and today the focus is around sustainability. A couple of housekeeping items, and then we will get into the agenda for today. In the Q&A window, please do keep on typing out your questions. And the last section of the webinar, we will try and pick up some of these. Also, towards the end of the webinar, when you exit, a survey form would come up. So please do fill that out. It will just help us in making this better. So, again, a warm welcome. I have with me my colleague, Dr. Priya Buddhist, who will be my partner in crime today. And the agenda for the webinar, as such, is divided up into three classical sections. The first one is something that I will take, which is around emissions, around net zero landscape, what has happened so far, how has this whole crisis evolved, and what are the expected scenarios in the future? And then what do we do about it? Who are the stakeholders in this entire ecosystem? Let's talk about all these participants, and then each one of us, each one of the stakeholder groups have a lot of responsibility around trying to curtail this problem. So that would be my part. So I would go on for about 12 to 15 minutes. Then I would hand it over to Dr. Priyal Bisht, who would then talk about how is Benori supporting businesses in their sustainability journey. And then we would leave the last 15-20 minutes for question and answers. So again, thank you so much for joining. We can get started. So if we really look at why do we call this a crisis? If we look at the history of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, um, 1850 to 1900, in those 50 years, um, all the emissions that happened by the time we reached the year 1900, there were about 8.5 uh, gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And the average temperature, and I believe this is the surface temperature, it was 13.84 degrees. Another 15 years, 50 years, we almost managed to double that. By 1950, we were emitting 16.5 gigatons. The temperature had gone up partially, marginally to 13.92. Fast forward to 2000, that's when a lot of damage happened. The emissions grew from 16.5 uh, to 40.8, uh, 40.8, and the temperature grew to 14.24. Talking about 2023, we are now sitting at 52.9, and the temperature is 14.87. Everybody got together in 2015. All the governments signed the Paris Agreement, where the target was that we will try and curtail this temperature rise in the world on the planet to within 1.5. The bad news is that this year already in 2024, the forecast is that we would be up by 1.55 degrees. Okay, so moving on, uh, I think we have already crossed the 1.5 degree Celsius limit. Um, Now, there are obviously a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different research papers which have been done by the UN. Um, and this one especially says that, with even the 230 targets, or with all the pledges and targets that have been put into place for the next 50, 60 years, even in the most optimistic scenario, we are still looking at 1.8 degrees. And of course, with in the worst case scenario, could be anywhere close to 3 degrees Celsius. Now, why is this important? Because temperature increase in the planet essentially leads to, of course, extreme heat, stress on the food production, access to water becomes far more challenging, and then insect-borne diseases like malaria and so on, they would be very, very rampant. If different forecasts, if we just look at it from an environmental impact perspective, there's already a 3x increase in disasters. By 2030, the forecast is 560 disasters in the world. And of course, one has always heard about the rise in sea levels. Um, there are a lot of cities which could be submerged, and the flora, the fauna, the coral reefs, a huge amount of ecosystem damage that could happen. We are already looking at 330 million people facing acute food insecurity, um, and so on. 15 million additional deaths could happen by 2050. Economic consequences, whether it's $2.8 trillion in loss and damages that we have already seen in the first two decades, and the global annual damage estimates are about $38 trillion. Very, very sadly, this could lead to another 7,500 million people getting into poverty yet again. So clearly, we have to do something about this. We just cannot afford. Unfortunately, we've already crossed the 1.5 degrees this year. Now, who should do something about it? The entire ecosystem here. It's the governments, it's the corporates, it's the individuals, investors, multilateral agencies, and of course, innovators, academicians, scientists, educators. All of us have a role to play in trying to minimize the damage, and in fact, over time, try and even reverse it. Now, if we talk about governments, if we look at the current situation, China, US, and India are the top three emitters in the world. Um, and of course, then you have the European Union. And on a per capita basis, you have a variety of different countries. The challenging point I wanted to highlight on this slide is if you look at the difference between the US per capita emission versus a developing country like India's per capita emission. Now, there are obviously a lot of global negotiations going on and will even become more intense. And as we speak, we have COP29 going on in Baku, where all these multilateral arrangements and politics and geopolitics politics of climate change will come to bear because you obviously cannot. How do you tell a developed country that the lifestyle and the quality of life of your people has to come down, the emissions have to come down, and at the same time, how do you tell a developing country that you cannot develop and grow and increase the carbon emissions as such? So I think it's going to be an interesting time for us, but somehow or the other, all the governments need to come together and come out with a balanced approach and try and have an optimal solution between growth and between climate change. Going on, I don't have the time to really go through this in detail, but all countries have come up with some kind of net zero target for themselves. China is 2060, US 2050, India is 2070. So China already is doing pretty well on the renewable energy part. They've already surpassed the capacity expansion that they were planning for 2030. They've already surpassed that. US is doing okay on the electric vehicle side, let's say. I mean, right now they are about 9% in terms of the EV market share. The target is 50% in 2030. Seems like a tall ask, but let's see. In India, of course, we are reducing our coal dependence dramatically. So from 72% in 2019, it's down to 50%. The key challenges remain. How do you balance out economic growth with emission reductions? How do you transition energy systems away from fossil fuels? How do you incentivize green financing? And of course, technology and green technology developments, how can that be sort of incentivized by various governments? Um, let's quickly talk about investors and innovators. Again, some examples here of a Citibank saying that they have been trying to mobilize $1 trillion for sustainable finance by 2030. Similarly, a very large number by Goldman Sachs. On the academic, scientific, innovation ecosystem, you have a variety of different examples, whether it's ETH, and of course, these are just a very, very few examples. There's a lot of innovation happening, lot of research happening, because God forbid in 10, 20 years, we don't want to have a COVID-like situation where it becomes a matter of survival. So it behooves us to come out with all kinds of different innovations in a balanced way. Similarly, I won't go through this in detail, but different kinds of multilateral agencies are trying to have various programs. So from the UN, you have the UNFCCC, where the key program is the nationally determined contribution. Similarly, from the environment program at UN around emissions gap report. So clearly the world, all the multilateral agencies are coming together, trying to get countries together and having a variety of different initiatives. So the GEF also has the Green Climate Fund. Of course, all of us as individuals have a lot of responsibility. The good part is that there is a high level of awareness now, and these are just some examples, whether it's the sustainable travel related or transport related, commuting related. So 46% of consumers are willing to pay more for sustainable travel, and that number is only going up. Whether it's in the form of supporting carbon neutral products. 62% of consumers are willing to pay more for sustainable food. Similarly, reusability of bottles, coffee cups, and containers, that is also getting widely adopted. Last point from my side, and then I will hand it over to Dr. Bisht. Um, if you look at sector-wise emissions, clearly it's the power industry with the power and heat generation plants that seems to be the biggest culprit. Almost 28.4% of all the emissions comes from this sector. The second is industrial manufacturing, that's about 21.6%. Third is the whole transport sector, 15.8, and the fourth is 12.2%, which is agriculture. Uh, Now, it's not that the industry and companies are not doing anything about it. Here are just some examples from the top three sort of polluting industries, if you will. If you look at the energy industry, Shell has a variety of different initiatives in place to reduce their scope 1 and 2 uh, emissions. Uh, One example given here is around carbon farming in Australia, which Shell is doing at scale. Um, if I take an example from manufacturing, so Dow, is innovating and coming up with the different kinds of, ethylene cracker facilities, let me put it that way. Similarly, from the transport industry, Boeing is trying to create fuel from waste, right? So bunch of initiatives happening at the corporate level, different industries, different companies across the world in various countries, various sectors. Um, However, all of the companies are facing a lot of significant issues. They have a lot of challenges, and that's where a company like Benori comes in, um, to try and help our clients in their net zero journeys, in their decarbonization, implementation, and so on. So this is a good segue for me to introduce Dr. Priyal Bisht at this stage. And Priyal, if you can take it up from here, and let's talk about what are the strategic questions our clients are facing. Um, uh, what are the various areas of analytical work that needs to be done, and maybe some of the case studies that we have been working on over the last 1 to 2 years.
Sure. Thank you, Ashish, and I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Now, so first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people in different time zones. Coming to the most important point, yes, of course, 1.5 degree centigrade already has been breached. And now, typically, they say that for if you breach it for 1 year, doesn't mean that you have breached it, because typically it is considered as a decade. But here we go. Now, we provide our support to the companies, the investors. So the first thing is, what you can't improve what you can't measure. So companies have already done their scope 1, 2, and 3 emission measurements. They have also, by and large, set the targets for themselves in a time bound manner. For few companies, it has been 2030, 2040, 2050, and so on for the net zero. Uh, but the critical question remains is, really, how do I go about it? Because there are so many parts that are affected, so many things are interlinked together, and it is easier said than done. Otherwise, we wouldn't be, having such a challenge as things stands today. So moving on, there are, and of course, there are different ways, and people can bucket areas where there are opportunities to decarbonize. Uh, we put it simply as the material slash packaging, energy, and the waste, where you can do something about it, right? As broadly in that sense. Now, some of the few questions that we, encounter, and those questions, then we kind of help the clients get specific answers on. Let's start with the first one, right? So, which are the different available packaging options. If you can go to the previous slide. Yeah. Uh, Packaging options which are alternates. What are the raw materials that can be sourced, and they can be sourced in a sustainable way? Who are the providers of it? How can I go about it? Similarly, if you do an ingredient which is a sustainable ingredient, it has a challenge into your product formulation. So without compromising the cost, without compromising the quality, without compromising the consumer experience, how can I really make these materials or ingredients really get into my formulation? So that is indeed a challenge. Similarly, when we move to the energy space, there are processes which will consume a significant amount of energy. So whether that energy source in the first place can be green, or they can be replaced by alternates like solar and wind and so on. The logistics, for example, if I have to have a logistics which should be greener, so yes, you have green fleets, green fuels, but what about, for example, the entire route? Is that something which is feasible? How can I make it? Which are the partners who are offering it, etc., etc. Similarly, and this is not only for energy, but there are a lot of incentive programs given by the government, or let us put it, the carrot and stick. So what is really the regulations around it? How much time do I have to comply? Where do I comply with? I'm a multinational, and there are so many things happening. So I want to really understand what is really going on, so I can take a benefit of it. The third is a waste monetization, which is really, how can I make sure that not only the waste is reduced, so different, I'm again generalizing it, but these are very specific question to the specific, industry that the client would serve in. But how can I do that in a much more smarter way, much more efficient way, cost effective way? And most importantly, if my waste is someone's raw material, how can I find that kind of a great mix? So that is something that is going to be very helpful. So to this, we have, from a solution standpoint, we obviously do the same. We look at materials, energy, and waste, and then put this in a solution where, if we go to the next one, where we are really looking at different parts of it, and I'll now go and explain one by one some form of the case study. So if we move to the next one, where we are saying, yeah, so in terms of this, it's different solutions that we pick up to address elements of it. So for example, what is the ESG initiatives that, let's say, my competition is taking, or the lateral industry is taking, where I can learn from them and I can customize it and put it into practice. What are the partners that I can identify? So it's a classical partner scouting process, who can help me become much more innovative and sustainable compared to my set of partners. So that's obviously an ongoing exercise. So how can that be done? Similarly, look at commercial due diligence of the offerings in the market, and whether it makes sense, and someone is small offering that, but I have a scale, and I can make it more global and at a huge volume. What is really the market for a particular options on the table? Is the industry going towards that, or am I the first one to do it? The pros and cons of it, and so on and so forth. So moving to the next one, where we have some use cases. So in the first one, a UK based advisory firm that is basically saying, help us quantify the scope 3 emission in our medtech product portfolio of our clients. And this is something that we help the client with the calculations done, on the agreed framework. The second one, a green ceramic tile manufacturer. They want to know, we do have a product. Please help us understand which is the market, what is the demand, who are the players, what is the competitive advantage if I can get, and so on and so forth. So please help us do this in specific markets. So here we were talking about China, KSA, and the UAE. The third one was, I want to understand the sustainable, packaging regulations around it. So what is the rigid and flexible packaging options I have on the table? Who are the players? What are these grades, quality, etc., etc., etc. So help me please conduct a assessment of the market. Help me understand who are the partner ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem, academia, and so on and so forth, and what can the benefit I can derive from the uh, you know regulations and the offerings from the government side. Now, just bringing little bit more color and life to what we do here. This is an internal report. We created this on marine resources, which is how can marine be explored in a way that it doesn't harm the food chain of the aquatic life. So here we looked at different elements. I won't go into a lot of details, but clearly from animal based, the plant based, the abiotic, and look at different derivatives. We looked at this flow, then we moved to the next. I'll just skim through in the interest of time. But again, these are bioactive compounds, natural and sustainable, nutrient dense. These are the benefits that one can get from the marine derivatives. And these are under different kind of sections, as you can see, right from being biodegradable to rich in essential nutrients to anti-aging properties and so on and so forth. Moving on, what is really going on in this sector, and whether it is just hot air or people are doing something about it. Do they have a product? So as you can see, right from the food and beverage, with the Nestle's, Cargills of this world, to the cosmetic, personal care, L'Oreal's and Cicero's of this world, and certainly to the big giants in the home care, the Unilever, and so on. They already have explored this. They have coming up with product and testing this up to see if this can become a sustainable source. Again, some quick examples of recent activity of very specific niche players as well, in addition to the big ones. But what are they really doing into this, and what other activities? How are they collaborating with academia, and so on and so forth? So how is the entire supply chain getting adjusted, and people are exploring on this one. Now, is it all rosy if we move to the next one? Clearly not. As any technology or any options would have the initial challenges, we clearly see there are supply chain volatility. The compounds or the chemical structures are complex. Uh, People need to still invest in R&D, which is expensive, and there are technical challenges. It needs to still get to a stage where it is comfortable, right, in terms of manufacturing this. And then there are regulatory and legal issues at hand of the entire marine ecosystem, right from sourcing, to then taking it to the market. Next, but again, the future potential, clearly there is a market growth. As you can see, there is it moved from 9,700 odd in million in 223 to, for example, now 18,000 as projected by end of 2033 in terms of USD million, USD, right? So that's what the market growth clearly is very promising. Consumer demand is there. There is a lot of R&D going on, and this is more at the public as well as private sector both involved in it. And obviously, governments are not uh, also proactively doing something about it, and not just sleeping over such a potential. But early days still, but there is certainly a promising trend here. Now moving on to the second topic, which was the energy trends. Here again, we are talking about some where the client wanted the renewable energy trends, and I will show that because that's also one of the dashboard that we have in our IP. But what is really the capacity which is there in solar, in wind, and so on and so forth. Um, the second one that we go is really looking at the government incentives and tax rebate. Now, this was done for a private equity firm where they wanted to understand what are these policies that are going to propel the solar, the battery panels, heat pumps, and so on and so forth. Finally, the last one is again coming from a professional services firm where they want to have long-term renewable procurement and PPE options. How is the market doing? How are players going about doing this? What are the best practices? What are the targets, and so on and so forth. This was done for the Europe geography. Quickly, this is a tracker I was just speaking about. This is where we are tracking India as a geography. It has faceted parameters where which are the existing projects, but most importantly, what are the upcoming ones, broken down by state level, the technology that is being used, the bids coming at a particular cost, and so on and so forth. Right. So that's a complete landscape where we track this, and this is a quick kind of a snapshot of what we cover. So moving to the next one, this is a waste topic where a client, basically B2B e-marketplace, and they wanted to assess the UK metal scrap e-auction market. How are really they What is the competitive landscape? Is there a marketplace or not? What kind of an offering is there? Will this grow in future or not? What is the view from a B2B standpoint, and so on. The second one, we are looking at the wastewater treatment and natural engineered wastewater treatment systems. How many of them are there? What is the capacity? What is the technology they are operating with? What are the leading providers in this market, and so on and so forth. The next one is where we are looking at the regulatory landscape and best practices for wastewater management, right? So around waste. Uh, yeah, so I think that's pretty much on that topic. Now, quickly, announcement here that Benori will be launching its sustain monitor. That will be a quarterly exercise that will be launching from Jan next year. A kind of a brief preview of what it will include. If we go to the next one, this is really a 3 by 3 matrix. There is a tech view, there is a regulation, and there is finance. And then the buckets that we mentioned, which is materials and packaging, energy, waste monetization. What are the different initiatives happening across the world, and who's doing what, right? So, of course, this is a brief overview and a summary of what it will be. It will be a quick couple of slides that we will share. Obviously, for people who have registered in this webinar, we will share it with you. But for others, I think there is so there is this, send us your interest on this particular email ID, and of course, we'll be very happy to share it with you or anyone that you believe would be interested. So, so that's pretty much it on this particular section. Ashish, I think we should take few questions. We have 10 to 12 minutes.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Priyal. That was very helpful. So I'll just go through the window and you know, Professor Mishra is obviously saying that his view is that EVs don't necessarily help us in saving emissions. The net result would be using greater energy requirement. Do you have any perspective on this, Priyal?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a very pertinent comment made here. Um, I think there is a lot of challenges with the, first of all, the lithium ion which is there, or the precious metal which is going into making it is, it is held by only few countries. Second, the question mark remains whether it is going to cater to the needs that is there if the entire world will move to, let's say, 40-50% of EVs. So the absolutely correct question, and hence it is very, very important to go into alternates which are still under evaluation, which is, for example, green hydrogen, which can have volume, which can have scale, but again, safety of it, storage of it, efficiency of it is all under development. So absolutely correct. Is EV the right thing? No, I always believe that one should have multiple options. EV is one of them because it has just scale at the moment, but there should be more viable tech working on it.
Right. Um, maybe I'll pick up another question. So somebody's asking, how can the industry shorten the learning curve to make its products green or partnering with an idea owner? So in a lot of Priyal, you do a lot of work in this space. So, we have also done some benchmarking projects where a client would want to learn what are the best practices around products greening and how do you scout for partners. So, any quick reactions to this? How does and maybe we should look at maybe not at an industry level, but maybe at a company level. How does a company go about shortening the learning curve and how do they identify partners and so on?
Yeah, no, again, a very pertinent point here. So from a company standpoint, Ashish, obviously they need to see, look, I mean, this is going to be a regular exercise, and company need to keep on having an eye on what is coming up. And obviously once they make a decision to invest, it is not going to change for few years. I mean, that's why company needs to be very careful when they invest a significant amount of money, whether it is $1 million or less or more. So so correct, that's true. Having said that, the world is extremely evolving at a very fast pace, right? So there could be something technology of interest and very much of great relevance couple of years back, but now it has lost relevance or not competitive enough. So that's a dilemma that is there, but it is good to be monitoring the space, good to check, good to see what the competition is doing, good to see what we can learn from the lateral industry. You may want to be an innovator here, you may want to be an early follower. It's up to a strategy of a company. I think a quick comment also on the government side, Ashish. I think it will be the governments at different countries, which we have seen, are also helping establish this platform where they are saying the marketplaces there where companies can register as green providers. And then the customers, the B2B customers, can tap in and to see, which are these companies, and have a matchmaking essentially. So that could be another one for sure to be checked.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Aradhna, we will absolutely send the PPT along with the recording of the webinar today to everyone who is attending today. So, you will definitely get this. Ravi has asked a question around how did we go about doing the scope 3 calculations on that UK project. So, Arpita has given a bit of a response there. But I guess the whole process was around identifying proxies and then doing some kind of a modeling exercise there, right, Priya?
Exactly. So that is something that we'll do. And again, to that specific questions, we will reach out, and share those details. That was with Ravi, I guess, right? So we have taken a note of it, and we will come back to you and share more details on that.
Right. And in some of our work, this whole area of, and especially when you look at, let's say green logistics and green transport systems, we were talking to one of the consumer goods companies the other day, and, they had this scope 3 emissions related question, right? So maybe you could quickly talk about how are consumer companies thinking about reducing their scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they are talking to their current logistics partner and trying to see what can be done there. Right now, the logistics partner are also, evaluating different options, and one of the clear options is that you can have, needless to say, you can have fuels or EVs, and Professor Mishra did mention about that. But at the moment, we have, let's say, EV is one of the solution. CNG is not renewable per se, but let's say it's much more greener, and so on, right? And hopefully, green hydrogen will be viable sooner than later. But look at these, talk to these logistic partner, be in close contact with them. Also try to identify tech providers who can help these. If you're a large multinational company having a huge scope 3 emission challenge, then work with these the suppliers of yours and help them become more viable, right? So I think that's something that is there. There is a roadmap to be drawn out, and then people need to follow. So it's it's a classical partnership that needs to be there. So that, I think, and companies are doing that, right? They are also working on feasibility. They are doing their bit on expanding the networks and where the feasibility is done, and creating an ecosystem around it. So I think some companies have taken a good lead on it.
Right, right, right. And Tarun, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of incentives, especially in the solar panels and in general the solar area in India. Um, uh, I think the challenge that we are facing is adoption of these ideas and people actually signing up for these schemes. But I think slow and steady, we will definitely get there someday. Vijay has a question, Priyal. The coverage of the monitor will be global or India?
It will be global.
Will be global. Yeah. Yeah. A question has come up on sustainable ingredients. So what is happening when we talk about sustainable ingredients? What are the major trends that one is seeing, and how are companies going about trying to make their, the supply chain and their ingredients as such more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, as I think I couldn't elaborate that further up at the startup, but when we look at making the ingredient screen, I mean, broadly, you have two choices. One you say, which is an easy choice, which is I have an existing formulation, it is proven, consumers love it, it is a success, and I get a good revenue in terms of the percentage contribution of that product. But I have made a calculation of my GHG, and it stands at, let's say, a unit of 100, argument's sake. Now, obviously, like everyone else in the company, because there is a company target, I need to reduce it by 20%. So then you go about finding the bigger villain or the bigger culprit, and you say, these are the ABC which have the higher carbon footprint, and they are not so easy to replace because the formulation is established and it takes a lot of time to do in the R&D. So then you say, okay, can I make it more greener? So which means that go back to the value chain and see who are the suppliers who have proven, and of course they have certification to say we produce at the same grammage or the same kg, lesser carbon footprint material compared to my competition. So that's how you would stack it up in a competitive environment and say, this is why you should take it from me. And this is now the onus also on the ingredient supplier to make it more greener. The second one is, as I was saying earlier, you replace it, which is more difficult because the entire R&D cycle needs to work towards making a replacement of, let's say, chemical A with chemical B. And that is a lot more difficult because it is a longer process. But companies are working towards it, right? Companies are trying to work on both strategy A and strategy B, B being more midterm to long term, A hopefully being more easier to fix. But again, the onus lies on the supplier there, not on the formulators or the product manufacturer. But you need to work simultaneously on a lot of these things together.
Right, right. Akshay is asking a quick question, and I know we have only a few minutes left. But the third use case we had in materials and packaging, maybe you can just comment some more light, some more shed some more light on that, Priyal. And Akshay, we can speak to you offline and give you a more detailed description of that particular use case.
Yeah, I mean, on the third use case, and I have this in front of me, we're talking about a global FMCG firm, and they wanted to assess sustainable packaging, where they were looking at readiness from a scalable solutions, right? Now, obviously, all these I mean, nowadays, no one works in isolation, we all know. So there are partners, there are supply chain. So they need to find out for this rigid and flexible packaging, partners who bring in that technology, partners who bring in that proven scale, and they want to do both. Now, obviously, there are nuances to that. You might have exclusivity, you might not have exclusivity. So, depending upon what the objective is, but the idea is to find out tech providers and give them that financial leverage so that you can scale that tech up, right? So these are the things that was there in on this particular part. One critical, obviously, one critical thing is we did a patent analysis to look little bit into the future and see what are the upcomings ones. So we identify these tech partners. I call them as catch them early. So catch them early before your competition do it, so you can have better commercials, terms, and agreement. But figure that out. Who are the innovators here?
Right, right, right. Absolutely. Ravi, we can talk to you offline about packaging related, you know, solutions for the pharma industry. And somebody else has also said, Kathy, again, we can talk to you offline about packaging since you are interested in that. So maybe the last question, since we are almost out of time, Saudamini is asking, what are the sources referred to track new initiatives by the bigger conglomerates and their respective impact?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I haven't come up with across a database that puts everything all together in a very quick, so far, right? I might be wrong, or I might not be informed enough, which is there, and hence it is a little time-taking exercise. But it can be done, and not a very, very complicated exercise if you know really what to search for and scout for. But that certainly can be done. But have I come across a database which will list everything there, which conglomerates do? I At least I am not aware of.
Right, right, right. No, there are several other interesting questions, and of course, people have liked the presentation and the content that we have produced today and presented. But unfortunately, we're completely out of time right now. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending this second second episode, if you will, in our knowledge series. We will keep on coming back to all of you with very interesting content around very critical themes for the world as we live it in the days to come. Um, Again, thank you so much. As we start exiting from the webinar, a short survey would pop up. So please do fill that out. It will really help us improve. Thank you so much and good evening.